Time for layer masks in Photoshop. So what is a layer mask and how does it work? Well, a layer mask is a non-destructive way of hiding and showing areas of your layer in Photoshop. So if I would like to go in and delete this entire background, that would be destructive. But if I would like to mask out that background, that would be non-destructive. So here's how you do it. You put a selection around what you want to end up seeing. Everything inside the selection is what you're going to see. Everything outside the selection, once the mask is applied, will be hidden. I happen to have a path in my image that I can turn into a selection. And you won't always have a path, so you can use one of your selection tools to put a selection around your image. In this case, because I have an embedded path, I'm going to click on the path thumbnail and then command click on the path thumbnail to turn that path into a selection. Then I'm going to go back to my layers panel. With my selection active, whatever is inside the selection is what I'm going to see. Whatever is outside the selection will be masked out or hidden. Not deleted, just hidden. So I have my selection active, I have my layer active. Go down to the bottom of my layers panel and we're going to click on this rectangle with a white circle in it. You see it says add a mask. Once I do this, it then hides everything that was outside the selection and keeps what's inside the selection. Looking at the layers panel, I now have two sections in my layer. I have my layer thumbnail, which I can specifically click on if I would like to do something with my image. And then I have my mask thumbnail if I would like to edit my mask. So when you have a mask on a layer and you click on that layer, you have to make sure that you click on either the image thumbnail if you'd like to edit that, or you click on the mask if you'd like to edit the mask. No longer do you just click on the layer and say, oh, I'd like to do X. You have to make sure you are now on that component of the layer if you'd like to edit that component. Going over to the mask thumbnail, when I right-click, I have the ability to choose from several different items that I can do with this mask. I can disable the mask, which just simply turns off the mask. It's still there, it just shuts it off. Right-click again, enable the mask. The shortcut for this is simply shift-click on the mask to turn it off. To turn it back on, it simply becomes just a click. Right-clicking on the mask again, we now have Delete Layer Mask. Deleting the layer mask will simply remove the layer mask and return the image to its pre-masked state. The background that was masked out comes back. I'm going to undo that. And the third one we have is Apply the Layer Mask. Applying a layer mask simply takes what we have here, and if this black area of the mask is hiding the background and we apply the layer mask, the mask goes away. However, whatever is hidden is now deleted. So, good to understand. So those are the three basic constructs here. Disable it, turn it on, turn it off, delete it, just get rid of it, and return your image back to normal, or apply the layer mask and actually delete what is masked out. So understanding a mask is quite simple. Black conceals, white reveals. If it's white, you can see it. If it's black, it just simply makes it disappear, or you end up seeing this checkerboard background. Now, sometimes when you're working with a mask, it can get confusing because we see the black and white here, but here, the black part of the mask translates into no visible pixels, complete transparency. If you'd like to see where the mask is actually working, if you click on your vertical slash, not your forward slash or your backslash, your vertical slash, that will simply turn on the visibility of the mask. And you can see every place that's red is going to show up where your object is masked out. Now, another component of this is when you apply a layer mask, this image and the mask are linked together with this chain in the middle. What does that mean? Well, if I were to go and I were to use my Command T for transform to transform my entire image, you'll notice that my transform bounding box goes around the entire image. Because remember, this still is the entire image. It's still there even though it's hidden. So normally I'm used to seeing my transform bounding box just around my image. But that would be if I had actually clipped out the background and removed it, erased it, deleted it, done. But here, when I do my Command T for transform, it's still doing my entire image. Now when I transform this larger and smaller, because my image and my mask are linked together, they will move together. And that is what's going to happen when you apply a layer mask. That's going to be linked by default. I click Escape here to get out of my transform. Now, why would you not want to have those linked together? Well, there are times that you would, and there's times that you want them to be linked together. If I click on this link, and that link disappears in between my image and my mask, I'm going to click on my image thumbnail, and I'm going to take my move tool, and I'm going to move my object. And you can see that my window or my mask stays in the same place, but then my object moves. And this can really freak a lot of people out. Okay? And they're like, well, this is weird because it's like I expect something to be showing over here. Well, you're not. Just think of this as a window. Okay? When you look out the window, you can see anything that you want. Okay? But the wall, what's black and what's masked out, you can't see anything. So if you were standing there at your window and you're standing there waiting for something to happen and nothing's in your window, then all of a sudden this piece of fruit comes by your window and you're like, wow, what's happening right there? You've just witnessed a drive-by fruiting. All joking aside, this is what you can do with a mask and an image. If I were to take my mask and select that, then I would be able to move my mask around, keeping my image in the same place. Now this is where using your vertical slash is helpful to turn on the preview of what your mask looks like in red. And this red dates back to pre-computer days when we would do masking by hand, where we'd actually print an image out and mount it on a board. And then, if we wanted to hide a portion of the image, we used what was called Rubylith, which was this clear acetate with a red overlay, and we would take an X-Acto blade and cut out all around. And then when we brought this into the camera room to shoot it, anything that's red would not be, or anything that's red would be exposed, and anything that wouldn't be exposed, or the other way around. Anyway, when you go into a dark room, you'd have a red light, because the red light doesn't expose the film. So this is what we'd have to do. So this comes back to the pre-computer age of production. That's why the default is that red, just in case you wanted to know. So here's my image, and I've got the entire thing masked out. I am going to relink those together because I do want them to stay together when I move them. Now, a very common thing that people ask me when we're learning masks is, can I apply a mask to a mask? Yes, but I'm just going to say, no, you can't. And the reason why is because once we apply the mask here, we have this mask is going to apply to everything on this layer. Sometimes people will go in and they'll hit the mask button a second time, and then they will have their image, they'll have a mask, and they're like, oh, see, we got another mask here. Well, this is kind of true, but for all intents and purposes, this isn't a mask like you think it is. This mask right here is going to be a pixel-based mask, which can be painted on with a paintbrush, can be erased with the eraser, and basically it's treated like an actual pixel-based layer. This is a vector-based mask, and you notice that when I go in here and I select my content, I can select my image, my mask, and then I can have my other mask selected as well. This mask here will not accept any pixels at all. This will only select paths. And it's very rare that you would use a pixel-based mask that you paint in or you select to get the mask and then follow up with a vector-based mask. So even though you hit that twice, it's fairly common when people begin to see this mask going on. I'm just going to grab this mask and throw it in the trash can here, and I want to disable that. So really, for all intents and purposes here, you can't have two masks on your image that are going to be pixel based. Now, somebody may say, okay, I've got the background out of here, and I would like to go ahead and mask this again. Well, we technically can't put another pixel-based mask on here, but there is a cool trick that we can do. If I want to preserve this apple the way it is, and then say, blend this apple out into the background here, because I want to put something in the background, I'm going to turn this image and mask into a smart object, basically keeping the editing capability of my image and my mask, but being able to then mask my smart object. If I right-click and I convert this to a smart object, it now turns this into my apple and my mask. How do I get to the apple and my mask? Because once I turn this into a smart object, if I want to paint or I want to erase, it won't let me do this because this is a protected object, a smart object. But if I wanted to go in and edit that mask, I can go to my smart object thumbnail, double-click, call up my image with my mask, and I can edit my image and my mask. That opens as a temporary file in a new tab. I would make my edits to this, save it, close that file, and then any updates would come into here. Now the benefit of turning this into a smart object is that, one, I'm never going to be able to edit it and destroy any of this, so it's non-destructive. But if I wanted to do something else here, I could go in now and I could mask my smart object. And then if I mask my smart object, I could go ahead and mask this, which also contains a mask in here. So technically, I'm masking an image that already has a mask on it. So check this out. If I go in and I decide that I'm going to do some stripes of the apple by drawing my rectangle selection tool, holding down my shift key and drawing some stripes like so, then if I apply a layer mask, you'll see that that mask is masking my smart object. Now inside my smart object is another mask as well. So kind of different things to do. And I'm just going to do my Command Z to undo that and turn that off. So masking a mask, you can't really do it, but you can mask a smart object that has been masked. So interesting stuff. So what I want to do is I'm going to take this apple and I'm going to drag it up into this Mount Rushmore image. Now another beauty of smart objects is when I do my Command T for transform, I don't have to worry about the degradation of resizing, scaling my image numerous times because it's a protected file. So I could scale it up and down and up and down, and I'm not going to lose the integrity of this. Now I'm going to turn off my apple layer here once I double click on the name and name it. And here's what I'd like to do. I would like to put the apple so that it looks like the apple is coming up from behind Mount Rushmore. Okay? It won't really be. It's actually going to be on this layer here. So in order to go in and be able to do a mask here, you have to think about this in terms of Photoshop and not in terms of, okay, Mount Rushmore is going to be in front, and then the apple, and then the sky will be in the background. So very commonly what people will do is they will take this background and they'll either try to cut the apple off right here at the edge of Mount Rushmore, or they will take this background layer and they will separate it into two separate layers. They'll isolate the sky and put that on a layer, and they'll isolate Mount Rushmore and put that on a layer, and then literally sandwich the apple in between. Okay? Well, that's destructive because you're cutting this apart. So if I were to go in and I were to cut off the apple here, I'm going to select my apple layer and set the opacity. If I wanted to cut the apple off here, I would probably do a selection right along the edge here. And if I were doing this destructively, I'd put a selection around here and then cut the bottom of the apple off. Well, because it's a smart object, I can't actually cut it off. I can't erase it, so I have to use a mask. So here is how a thinking of the mask works. What I'd like to do is, and I ask this question all the time, where do you want to see your object? Well, here's my object. Where do I want to see it? I want to see it in the sky. Okay? So if I want to see the apple in the sky, I need to select the sky because I have to create a window in order for me to see the apple through. Okay, so I'm going to go to my Mount Rushmore layer, and I want to put a selection around the sky, which, once I select my apple layer, that selection will become my window or my mask in which I can see my apple. So a lot of people will go in and select the sky and cut it out. Well, don't cut it out because that's destructive. Take that selection and then just apply it as a mask to the apple. I'm going to use the magic wand tool to select the sky here because it's pretty much continuous color. So in my magic wand tool, I'm going to set a 5x5 average, which is going to give me a little bit better averaging of the blue. Then I'm going to set the tolerance to about 40, which is going to give me a decent selection of the sky. I need to be on the Mount Rushmore layer, and I'm going to click and select the sky. If there are little bits that are missing or over-select, just go in with your lasso tool, your polygon lasso tool, remove them or add them to get a selection. Now, with my selection active, if I were to apply a mask here on my Mount Rushmore image, anything inside the selection is what I'm going to see. Anything outside is going to be masked out. And if I apply a mask, I only see the sky and I mask out Mount Rushmore. But that's not what I wanted. Okay? I wanted the selection or the mask to be on the apple. But that doesn't mean I can't use another layer to get the selection to create my window, and then use that window, that selection, to be applied to my apple. So once I select my apple layer and turn that on, my selection is still active. Okay? Just because I use the Mount Rushmore layer for the selection doesn't mean the selection, is only on the Mount Rushmore layer. Selections apply to whatever layer you have selected and active. So now I have my apple layer selected. I have my selection. What's inside the selection is what I'm going to see of the apple. What is outside the selection is what's going to be hidden on the apple once I apply my layer mask. I apply my layer mask, and miraculously, looking at this mask, black conceals. It conceals everything that is along that edge of the selection, and it reveals everything inside the selection. Now in this case, this would be the perfect time to unlock these. I don't want to move my mask or my window. I only want to move my image sitting inside that mask. If this were to move together, and I were to take my move tool, then I'm going to get this weird offset puzzle. If I unlink that and select my apple, I can now move that freely behind. Okay? Now it really isn't behind. It's actually on top of Mount Rushmore. Okay? We think in real life it would be Mount Rushmore's in front, then the apple, and then the sky, which if you have done that before, you would have 3 layers, Mount Rushmore behind, apple in the middle, sky on top. But that's why I said I want it to appear as if the apple is behind. I don't want the apple to be behind. I want it to appear as if the apple is behind. Pretty awesome. Okay. Now I can use my vertical slash here, and you can very clearly see what is masked out. So vertical slash turns it on, turns that off. Pretty cool. Now I have another object here. I've got a bagel. It's already been chopped out of the background here, and I don't have the need to put a mask around it because it's already got a transparent layer. Okay, so somebody already took the background out. I'm going to drag that up to Mount Rushmore, and I'm going to put it in there too, because we're going to make this like a little toaster with things popping up. So I'm going to name my layer and click return. And now what I'd like to do is I would like to go ahead and I would like to mask this out as well. Well, with a mask actually is a hidden selection. And if I ever wanted to get that exact same selection back to then use that selection to apply for the bagel here, one way I could do that was go to my mask thumbnail, hold down my command key, and command click on that mask to activate that selection, which is what we just had. I'm not going to go back to Mount Rushmore here and reselect the sky, because if I did, I wouldn't get the exact same selection. But you know what? We've got the mask here, and we got a selection, and then applied the mask from that selection. So if you command click on a mask, anything that is visible shows up at the selection. and anything that isn't is outside the selection. Now, this is one way of creating another mask, is command clicking on an existing mask, going to your new layer, and then going in and applying the mask. You have that. But I'm going to undo this because I like this feature a whole lot better. No selection active. I'm going to go into my layer, and I'm simply going to click on my mask, no command click, because I don't need to activate the selection. I just want to duplicate this. I've duplicated layers. I can duplicate masks. If I hold down my Option key or Alt key and click and drag on my mask, this will allow me to copy my mask from one to another. I'm going to undo this. If we don't hold down Option or Alt key, you can just drag the mask around from one layer to another. Okay? It doesn't like live on that layer forever. So this is kind of cool. So what's interesting here is that I don't have a mask on my original bagel because somebody had taken out the background. But remember, we started off with the apple that did have a mask on it. So I actually have a smart object now, that if I double click on the smart object, there is a mask there. And then that smart object with a mask also has a mask on it too. So that's kind of interesting. Okay. So what happens if I'd like to do several items behind here? I'm going to turn off my bagel for now. What I'd like to do is I'd like to do several apples in the background here. I'm going to reduce the size of my apple by selecting my apple layer, doing my Command T for transform, scaling that down. I'm going to put my apple over here. But I'd like to have several apples. And this then could be very easy to do because I could select my layer, hold down my Option or Alt key, and just Option or Alt click and drag and produce several different apples, like so. Okay, that could be fine. And each one has a mask on it. Okay, so this is one way of doing it. But I'm going to do this a different way. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go in and I'm actually going to delete the mask altogether. Okay, I have this mask to copy over, but I want to show you this cool trick. And I like this trick when you have multiple things and you don't want to put a mask on each and every object here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this object several times, and then I'm going to select the first object, hold down the Shift key and select the last object, and I'm going to group these together by going under the Layer menu and choosing Group Layer, Command G, put them all together. Okay, and this is my apple group right here. And now what I could do is I could put a mask on the entire group or folder. So here's my mask, or I could have my selection active, either way, but I've already got my mask here, and I could Option click and drag that mask to that group, and that group will now go ahead and mask every single thing in. So each and every image in here doesn't have an associated mask with it, but because it is in a folder that is masked, what this allows me to do is move this content around freely. Okay, and with that, then if as long as it's inside the folder with the mask, everything's masked out. Could each and every one of these have a mask too in a different way? Sure, but then this will go ahead and mask everything. Now here's an interesting thing. When I click on my individual layers, you'll see that I get my normal blend mode menu. When I click on a group with this, it says pass through. And pass through basically means that all of these are inside this group and it's passing through so that we can see one mask with just the visibility of everything inside that group. Okay, so kind of cool way to do that. So technically, but not absolutely right, I have a smart object that could have a mask in the smart object here. And then if I wanted to, I could mask that object here, put it into a folder, and mask that object. So there's ways to mask, but not put multiple masks on one layer. So it's kind of an interesting scenario in order to be able to work with masks. Now, another cool thing too is this. If you double click on the mask here, you may get a dialog box coming up that says, what do you want to set your preferences as? Do you want to set it to open your properties panel, or do you want to open your select and mask? Okay. Now, if you've already gone in and set that preference, I've set that preference to open the properties panel. If not, if you've set that preference to open the Select and Mask, you'll need your Properties panel from your Window menu. Here, what I can do with this is when I select my mask and I open my Properties panel, I can control the density of the mask. Now, black conceals and white reveals, but if I knock down the density here and I get gray, gray is going to allow some of that through. Black conceals, white reveal. 50% gray is going to let it show halfway through. And this is non-destructive, by the way, folks, because I can just simply take my mask and control, basically like a dimmer switch, how much shows through. I can also go in and I can non-destructively feather that mask to soften the edge of that mask. And you can see I can kind of get that soft edge. If you want to see what that looks like, hold down or just click on your vertical slash here and you'll see that softness of that edge. Okay? Pretty cool. Non-destructive because if I don't like the feather or the softness of it, I can just go to my Properties panel and undo that feather. And you'll see when I feather that, you can see in my layer thumbnail, it will actually show that soft edge. Totally non-destructive. Pretty awesome. I like this a lot. So that is the way that I can create a layer mask using a selection. Now we're going to jump over to my light bulb here. And what I'd like to do is I'm going to take my 8-ball, I'm going to merge that with my light bulb. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to do this in a way that's all manual. I'm going to paint this in with my brush tool and not use a selection to get my blending. This 8-ball also has a path, so I'm going to command click on my path thumbnail to turn that into a selection. If your object doesn't have a path, draw a selection around your object. I'm going to go to my layers panel, and I'm going to mask this out right here. Okay. Now I'm going to turn this into a smart object by right-clicking so that I have my masked object, but it's just one component. I'm going to take my Move tool, click on this, drag it up to my light ball tab, and bring it back down in. So there is my masked 8-ball in here. I'm going to name my layer. I'm going to set the opacity way down on this 8-ball layer so we can see the light bulb through. I'm going to use my Command T for transform, and I'm going to transform my smart object down, and I'm going to size it, and I'm going to position it right there on the 8-ball. And setting the opacity low here lets me see through. Now I'm going to set the opacity back up to 100%. What I'd like to do is I would like to blend this in so this becomes my 8-bulb. Kind of cool. So instead of putting a selection around my object, I'm going to select my layer, and with no selection, I'm going to add a layer mask. Well, if I have a selection, what's inside the selection is what I see, and it's going to be white on the mask. What's outside the selection is what's going to be hidden or masked out, and that's going to be black. I had no selection, so I get a mask that is going to be all white, which is going to reveal all. Black conceals, white reveals. With this layer, now you can go in and you can paint on this mask. Make sure your mask is selected, because if your image is selected and you try to go in and paint, you would, if this image weren't a protected smart object, you would be able to paint right on there. But on the mask, click on the mask, and your color picker will revert to black and white. So if I had colors here in the color picker, and I was working on something, and I had colors in here that I was working with, okay? When I'm on my image layer, I will see my colors. When I go to my mask, you'll notice that those change to black and white, because you can paint with any color on your mask just as long as it's black and white. So if somebody's like, oh, I was painting with color on my mask, that wasn't a mask, because the only two colors we're going to use here, black and white. Black is going to conceal, white's going to reveal. So I'm going to grab my brush, and I'm going to right click. I'm going to choose a soft round brush. I'm going to make that brush very large. Okay. Now, with my brush active, my mask selected, and black is my foreground color, I can now come in here and I can paint on that mask with that nice soft brush all around the edge to kind of blend in that edge and blend everything in. Now, if I would like to cut back the intensity of my brush, okay, I don't have to paint with 100%, which is going to completely block out my image. I'm going to set my opacity here to say 50%. I'm just going to type the number 5 on the keyboard to get that to be 50%. Now, if I paint with 50% black on my image, you'll see every time I click and I paint, it's going to knock back the visibility of that image by 50%. And you can see it's kind of gray in the middle of my mask right there. Okay? If I hit my vertical slash, this is what it looks like. Now, I don't have to worry about it going all the way to the edge here because all I'm doing is I'm just painting around this 8 ball. So painting all of this here doesn't make any difference. That's already transparent. So this gives me a really cool look and feel. Now, if I've painted too far and I've hidden too much, I can always go back and paint in with white. I'm not going to switch over to my eraser tool to erase what I've done. I either paint with black or I paint with white. So coming over here, I use my little flip arrow right here, which is the letter X, by the way. Something when you get used to working with masks, you're definitely going to use that X. Just simply type the letter X. It now flips white as your foreground. Well, if I paint with white on my object, and here I'm painting with white at 50%, black conceals, white reveals. So as I paint, it's going to bring this back more and more and more. Kind of cool. If I go too far, I hit X, it brings black to the foreground, and whatever opacity I'm painting with my brush, here at 30%, it allows me to go in and kind of paint that in anywhere that I want to. So all non-destructive. If I shift-click on my mask, my entire image is back there. Click again, masks it here. Now, what happens if I just want to do like a blend from total hide to total show? I'm going to grab my gradient tool, which is the letter G. Now, the gradient tool can work on a mask as well, because the gradient tool, in this case, because I'm in my mask, my colors are black and white. Whatever colors I have in my color picker will be mirrored in my gradient ramp here. And what I'd like to do is I'd like just to do a transition. And maybe I want to do a linear transition, so it just goes from complete show to complete hide, or vice versa. So here in my gradient ramp, starting here where I click is going to be completely hidden, and then where I drag my gradient, it's going to be completely showing. So if I start here with my gradient tool, and I would like this to be completely hidden, and drag it up to where it's completely showing, I'm going to click here, and I'm going to drag my gradient, and it's going to create that gradient right there. Black conceals, white reveals. And you can see that it blends in nicely. Maybe I pull a little bit longer, okay, to get more of a soft gradient there, or go all the way in, like so, and blend that in. Now I could do that. I could also do the opposite direction, and it just simply redoes the entire mask. Okay? If I wanted to do a circular gradient, because I've got my linear, I've got my circular, I've got my one that goes all around, my reflective, and then my pyramid. If I do the linear, or do the radial gradient right here, where I start is always the first part of my ramp. So where I click is where it's going to be completely hidden. So here what I'm going to do is I'm going to reverse the ramp. Okay? So where I click is going to be completely showing. So I'm going to start in the middle of my 8-ball and I'm going to drag out. Okay? And because the ramp was white here, that's where I start to show, going to complete hide. So I could go and I could take that and I could drag that out and get more of a radial gradient, and it fills the entire mask section. And you can see that it's all masked out, but just that soft little pinpoint of light. Okay, that's kind of cool. Now another way that we could do this too, if I wanted just that soft little pinpoint, instead of painting all around this or using this, is I could actually go in and I could fill this entire layer with either black or white. And then I could paint in with the opposite color. So instead of going in here with my black brush and painting all around doing this, I could just select my mask, and I could do my option delete, which is going to fill my mask with the foreground color. Then I could take my brush with white and say at 50% and click on there, and with a soft brush white at 50%, it paints in white on the mask and basically reveals this nice soft opening for that to come through. Okay, so it's kind of cool what we can do with this. Now we can manually paint with this, we can do a selection, and we can do a combination of both. It doesn't matter. Okay, a mask is just think of it as a black and white image. You can have a selection, you can use your brush tool, paint in black and white, however you'd like to do that. So pretty awesome stuff with masks.